All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be going over APUSH. This is going to go over every single period that's going to be on the test, as well as periods 1 and period 2, so that you can use it for external information in your DBQ. So first we're going to go over the objectives of tonight. First, we're going to look at some of the common questions that are relevant to this year's exam, since there are a few changes. I'm sure most of you are aware of those changes, but we're just going to clarify a couple of those things. We're going to go over the things that you are going to be expected to know come test day. We're going to go through every period, all of the key details that you should know for those periods so that you're better able to analyze those documents. We're going to also talk about what's on the exam and what was excluded on the exam. And we're going to review those relevant periods and really dive into the specifics of each period and what you can expect come test day. All right. So first, let's take a look at the AP exam details. So this year's exam will be given online and there's no lockdown browser. From our understanding right now is College Board is allowing us to take this test anywhere you have an internet connection, and you can either type your essay or upload your essay as a picture. Those are your two options. The only thing that's going to be restricted is communication, okay? So you are to have no communication with other students that are taking the test during the time that the exam is open. And the use of internet overall is strongly advised against per College Board's tweets that they've put out on their official Twitter account. Now, there's no restriction that's going to be put on your internet as there's no lockdown browser, but they're just strongly advising against it. Test integrity is going to be maintained through a variety of checks, including teacher verification that matches your typical tone. So they're going to make sure that what you're writing matches how you usually write. They're going to be sending your essays to your teachers for review, okay? So in addition to that, there's also other measures that we're not quite sure on yet. They have mentioned something about some sort of version of Turnitin to check these essays to make sure that they're not too alike and that you didn't totally copy and paste from someone else's work. As it stands right now, we're looking at an exam date of May 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And there's a makeup test date as well if you happen to not be able to make that time on June 3rd at 12 p.m. You're going to be given 15 minutes to read and respond to one DBQ, and then you'll have an additional 5 minutes to upload your response. And just to answer the questions that I see in the chat right now, it is just the one DBQ, okay? And there's nothing else. That's all you have to do for the APUSH exam is a single DBQ, okay? And that's it. You'll have 45 minutes to do that. And like I just said, you'll have 5 minutes to upload your response, either a written response that you might have written in a Google Doc or on Word, or you can also take a picture with your phone and upload it that way as well. So let's take a closer look at what the DBQ is going to expect you to do, okay? So the DBQ is going to give you 5 historical sources, and one of them won't be a text-based source, okay? And this question is going to see if you're able to respond to the prompt with historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So this is why it's so important to be able to understand at least most of the periods so that you're well prepared for whatever the test may throw at you, okay? You're also going to be expected to describe a broader historical context, which you can draw from periods 1 and period 2, even though they're not going to be directly asked in the DBQ. We know that for sure. Periods 1 and 2 are going to be excluded there. We know that we can use our period 1 and period 2 context for additional information, which is going to be 2 of your points that you'll be able to receive on your DBQ. Okay. It looks like we're having extreme issues. Is anyone experiencing some weird issues right now? If you could let me know in the chat. If not, we'll continue. Alright, so we're going to move right along then, since it seems like there are no issues with our stream. So some more details. We know that the prompt for this DBQ is going to be from units or periods 3 to 4, okay? And it's going to have 5 documents instead of the usual 7 documents. So it's going to be sort of like a modified DBQ, right? It's going to have slightly lower content, okay? And it's only going to focus on those periods. Now, I do mention here that you're going to be rewarded extra points for external knowledge, okay? So you're going to be able to draw that external knowledge from periods 1 and period 2, right? So again, even though they're not directly going to be asked on that DBQ, you're able to draw that information from those periods to help support your answer. So just to reinforce that idea one more time, because there's a lot of confusion on it, units 3 to 7 are going to be used on the DBQ, okay? And units 1 to 2, even though they're not off the table, they're only going to be used for those 2 points for the content knowledge outside of what you're being asked. That unit 1 and unit 2, again, is only going to be your external information that you can provide. All right, so let's take a look at period 1 here. Okay, so here are the period 1's essential questions. We want to look at how Native American societies were similar or different to our society at the time, the US society, the American society. We're going to look at the historical forces that caused Europeans to conquer territories in the Americas. We're going to look at how the Columbian Exchange led to demographic and cultural shifts in both sides of the Atlantic. We're going to look at what ways did the Native Americans and Europeans affect the worldviews of each group. What did they do to create a name for themselves? What were the sort of highs and lows of what they were known for? And we're also going to look at what methods historians use to interpret both the past and construct of history. All right, so if we look at our period 1 timeline here, it starts off when Columbus arrives. Then we move into the Columbian Exchange. Then we'll see that Spain sends explorers. And then we have Sir Walter set up Roanoke Island, that is known as the Lost Colony, that disappeared by 1590. And then we have in 1588, England defeats the Spanish. And then England becomes the superpower and starts colonizing shortly after that. So let's look at our first key concept in period 1. So there were diverse native societies that were adapting to their environments. These societies grew up in a certain place, but now they're somewhere else, and they're sort of starting to develop and adapt to what's going on around them, just like any normal human would in a new situation. As things are changing and England becomes more powerful, people are going to have to adjust to that. They're either going to start to stand up and rise up and rebel against the power, or they're just going to go with the flow. We're also going to see the spread of corn, really, from present-day Mexico northward into the present-day American Southwest and even beyond. This corn is going to be crucial because it's going to start to support economic development and settlement. And then from there, we're going to start to see some technological advancements, like the advanced irrigation and we'll also see some social diversification among the societies. We're going to start to see a little bit of like different people start to come together. We're going to see these new groups of people mingle intertwinedly like we've never seen them before. Usually these groups of people would settle and live separately. Now you're going to see them together. And then in Northwest and present-day California, those coast communities, by now, we're really just focused on fishing and foraging. All right. Now we're going to look just a little bit more at our key concept for 1.1. Okay. So in the Mississippi River Valley and along the Atlantic seaboard, we're going to see these mixed agricultural and hunter-gatherer economies. And what you're also going to notice is the development of these permanent villages. People are going to start to settle down. They're done with the nomad stages. They're done traveling around every couple days. You're going to see these residences and these villages that are starting to be more permanently established, and people are going to start setting up lives for themselves. They're going to really live together with their families or live together with their coworkers or whoever you want to consider they were living with at the time. That's what they were doing. They were setting up those more permanent villages to start living together. Okay, there's some stream issues. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me try to change something here. Give me 1 second. We're going to try to fix this loading issue. All right, how are we looking now? A little bit better, hopefully. Alright, good. So it looks like things are working now. So just if you missed the last thing that I was saying, is that people are going to start to settle in permanent villages. Okay, you're going to see these communities coming together and starting to live together more. Before they were favoring a more nomadic lifestyle, now you're going to see more of those permanent settlements. Alright, so alright, can everyone hear me now? I've refreshed the stream. Any luck now? Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a yes. Okay, good. All right. So we're going to move into key concept 1.2 now. So we're going to look at the contact among Europeans, Native Americans, Africans, okay? And that's going to result in the Columbian Exchange. And then from the Columbian Exchange, we're going to see a couple things. We're going to see some social values that are going to be exchanged. We're going to see cultural customs that are going to be exchanged. And we're also going to see political changes on both sides of the Atlantic that are going to shape the governments there. The European nations' efforts to explore and conquer the New World, that's going to stem from the search of this desire to find wealth, economic, and military competition. Every nation wanted to be the wealthiest. They wanted to have the strongest economy, right? They wanted to have the strongest military. So that's what they were after. And on top of that, they had a desire to spread Christianity. They were after religion, which we know is big during this time period, and they're trying to convert more people into it. This is where those 3 G's come into play: gold, God, and glory. Those are really those motivating factors behind the majority of the exploration and conquest that we're seeing during this age of exploration. New crops from the Americas are going to increase the population in Europe. We're going to see a shift into capitalism. If you look at this graphic here, it's a great picture of what capitalism looks like. You have all of these hard working people, right? And someone's just eating it up. And we're also going to see this new technology again. We're going to see even more technology here that's leading to these new companies known as joint stock companies, okay? And those companies are going to increase the amount of trade and increase the amount of trade volume that we're going to see, all right, across the Columbian Exchange, which, again, to reinforce that idea, it's the exchange of even diseases, right? We know ideas, religion, cultural values, foods, crops, and even people, right? We're going to start to see these people go from the old world to the new world and back and forth. And again, this is a good picture of what the Columbian Exchange looks like. So going into Europe, we have things like avocados, vanilla, pineapple, turkeys, pumpkins. And then coming out of Europe, we have these diseases that the New World hasn't been exposed to yet, like smallpox and whooping cough. That's going to be a big factor in a lot of the death that we'll see over in the New World. And then we also have livestock and grains and all sorts of other crops that we'll see come over from the old world to the new world. So the Columbian Exchange and the development of the Spanish Empire in the Western Hemisphere is going to result in a lot of changes. We're going to see some demographic changes. We're going to see some economic changes and social changes as well. Okay. And those explorations that are happening here are accompanied by the widespread deadly epidemics that we're going to see. We're going to see this huge spread in smallpox, which is a viral infection that's going to lead to the death of about 90 to 95% of the native population in the New World. And Europeans are also going to introduce a few new things over to the New World, like horse and oxen and rice and wheat as well. Those were things that were going to be brought over from the Columbian Exchange. So Native Americans were forced to work on plantations. The Spanish crown granted a person a specified number of natives. So each person would be allotted a specified number of natives to act essentially as slaves. And these people would work and work. And we'll see here that African slave trade expanded as well to replace the declining native populations. And let's think for a second. Why is the Native American population declining? Oh, right. They're being killed by the smallpox that's coming over from Europe. Millions of Africans are shipped to the New World as part of the Atlantic slave trade, which again is coming from the same triangular Columbian trade or exchange even, that we're seeing from the Old World to the New World and back and forth. We're also going to see this racial social class system that's going to be put in place that's going to really define the status of Native American and African people. And really, it's a way of race classification. And anyone that's not white is considered less than superior. Anyone that was Native American or African American was looked down upon. They were kind of below the white people in social class, right? So we already know that from how we've seen African American slaves treated later in history, but at this point in history, it was kind of new to create a defined system that would support those ideas. Before that was only implied, but now we're having something sort of written down and really explained and elaborated upon, right? And we're also going to start to see some conflicts. A lot of conflict is going to happen here. First, we're going to start to see some conflict between the Native Americans and the Europeans during these early years. And even though they would adopt some of the useful aspects of each other's culture, this conflict is still going to happen. The native people also defended their land through diplomacy as well as military when they felt that they had to. They tried really hard to stick to the first diplomacy option, but because of how intense some of the tensions rose to, the conflicts between the Native Americans and the Europeans, that's when they resorted to this military power. And debates were sparked among Europeans internally, right, about the treatment of these people. So Europeans themselves were like, are we doing the right thing here? Are we treating these people in a fair way? Are we doing something wrong here? They were really trying to figure out what they were doing wrong. Some of them totally agreed with the treatment of Native people, and some of these Europeans thought it's time to treat them fairly and with respect, just like they do to one another. We're going to see these cultural differences among Europeans and Native Americans lead to even more conflict. Okay. So European religious and political leaders looked at how non-Europeans should be treated and how religious, cultural, and racial justifications of the treatment of Africans and Native Americans. So again, it's the idea that some of these European leaders were starting to consider how they were treating these other people and if it was fair or not. Alright, so that wraps up period 1. So now we're going to move into period 2, which is 1607 to 1754. Period 2 essential questions. So we're going to take a look at in what ways did Europeans develop different patterns of colonization. We're going to see different ways of colonization that's happening here, not just one, okay? We're also going to look at how the Europeans, when they were colonizing, how that intensified the conflict between the colonizers and the natives. What's it going to increase? You probably already know this, which is great, but we're going to really dive into what is the driving force of that intense conflict between the two groups. Then we have what impact did the increase in exchanges with the Atlantic world, or the New World, have on colonial societies. So we're going to see this increase, right? And we're going to look at the impact of that increase. And it's important to consider how, even though it's higher volume, you're going to see more money, more people come through. If it's not properly supported, which luckily for the most part it was, things would come crashing down, right? So that could be one of the possible impacts. For the most part, had a fairly positive impact with all of the goods that would start to come over and the development of technology. So that does make this increase in exchanges, for the most part, very positive. Right, here is your period 2 timeline. If you would like to take a picture of this, these are some good events that you should know. You don't have to know these exact dates, but it's a good idea to know these events and what's going on during these years, so you have an idea of what's going on in period 2. And again, period 2, all you're going to use it for is context, okay? You are not going to use period 2 as a DBQ topic. It's only going to be used as supporting context for the DBQ that you're working on. All right, so let's look at period 2 and the first key concept. So we're going to see that Europeans developed a lot of colonization and migration patterns. And these would be influenced by their goals, the cultures, and the different environments that they were going to settle in. What we're also going to start to see is that they're competing with each other. Once they move over into the New World, they are literally competing from settlement to settlement about who's doing better in the New World. And, as well, as expected, they're going to compete with the Native Americans for resources, right? They're going to really start to challenge these people into caving in to helping out these new Europeans, because, again, they feel like they're higher up than them. They feel like they're worth more than them, or that they're more powerful than these Native Americans. And again, these European powers are really competing to get control of these colonies. And each country, while they have different motives, they're all after the same goal, which is power, right? And we're going to see these competition over resources as well, not just the land. Again, between the internal rivals of the Europeans and the American Indians. But this competition is also going to drive something else. It's really going to push industry and trade higher up, and it's going to elevate the amount that will see this. You'll see more places starting to trade. You'll see more places starting to industrialize and build factories and hire more workers. And even with that good side of things, we're also going to see that create some conflict in the Americas. All right. Our second key concept for period 2. The British colonies participated in political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain, which we know, right? That's going to encourage stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to Britain's control. So even though some of these values are being brought over, that doesn't mean that they're being accepted by the people over here in the New World. For the most part, they're against that, right? So even though these values are being kind of forced onto them, they're not liking them. The Indians are going to start to form alliances and rivalries with both the Europeans and the colonists to try to preserve their way of life. The Indians here, the Native Americans, are really trying to play nice with these new people that are coming over into their land. They're taking the slow approach of really trying to alliance first, create an alliance, and then they're creating rivalries. So for the most part, they're starting out as peaceful, and then that's when they're going from peaceful into something more hostile. And the colonists begin to have their own independent cultures and institutions. We'll see each settlement starts to have their own idea of what a government would look like, their own separate idea of religion, and different laws that would be put into effect depending on what settlement you're in. And at the end of the day, this is going to lead to conflict with the European bosses back in the Old World. So even though these New World leaders are creating their own independent cultures, the Old World European bosses aren't liking what they're doing, and that's going to cause a lot of conflict. Period 3 is 1754 to 1800, and this is the first period that you may see a DVQ on, okay? So this one is extra important to pay attention to, and from periods 3 to period 7, that's what you're going to see on the test. So let's dive in. So the essential questions for period 3. We're going to look at the causes and the consequences of the American Revolution. We're going to look at how did the leading Americans address the regional differences to develop a federal government. We know that each settlement was creating their own separate governments and their own separate structures, but how are they going to bring it all together? We're also going to see how migrations across North America is going to start to intensify the conflicts that we'll see throughout. So again, here's a good timeline. You don't need to know these dates exactly, but there's a lot going on in period 3. There's a lot of important acts and taxes that are put into place that we know of. We have the Boston Tea Party. We have Common Sense being published, sort of a big example of the first time that we're seeing this radical or enlightened thinking is starting to emerge here with Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Also, in the beginning, what's sparking all of this is the French and Indian War, right? And then the treaty, and then all of these acts and taxes are going to be put on to the New World and the colonies that are settling there. All right. And this is a continued timeline of period 3. We have the Treaty of Paris that's going to end the Revolutionary War. We have Shays' Rebellion. The Constitution is going to be ratified. Our first president, Washington, is going to be inaugurated. Our Bill of Rights is put into place. And then later, towards the end of period 3, in 1798, we'll see the Alien and Sedition Acts. So let's look at the beginning of period 3 here. We're going to see that the British is going to attempt to assert tighter control over its North American colonies, and the colonies are going to try to resolve that on their own by pursuing self-government. And when all of the colonies start to develop their own government and separate ideas, this is going to lead to war. When all of these settlements have different ideas and different perspectives on what the government should look like, of course that's going to lead to conflict. And in this case, it will lead to the war. And the competition among the British, French, and the Native Americans for economic and political advantage is going to intensify immensely. This is going to lead us to the 7 Years' War. And then we know that the result of the 7 Years' War is that Britain defeated the French, and now they're allied. And those allies with the French are the Native Americans. So now the British have another reason to hate the Native Americans even more, right? And it's going to start to justify things for them in a way. They're going to feel like these people worked with the French to try to undermine our power and authority, and now they're going to be totally against the Native Americans, right? They have another reason that they're going to dislike them other than just being in their way. So, the desire of many colonists to assert ideals of self-government. Again, we know that's going to lead to war, right? They're trying to get rid of these imperial values and beliefs that have been imposed upon them forever. And we're going to see this colonial independence movement and then war with Britain. It's going to be a way that the colonies are able to break free in their own methods, but none of them are going to be united right now. They're all going to have these different ideas and different approaches to government that are going to create that internal, or here, the civil war. Britain is then going to impose numerous laws, right? And that are going to really be a lot of taxes that are going to be resented by the colonists. Colonists are going to hate the British for a lot of these taxes that are going to be imposed on them. So how did the colonists even beat this amazing British military, right? That's a question that's really easily answered. They had one of the best defense tactics. They had Washington. Washington was such a good leader that even with these limited amount of resources, he was able to lead these people, or his colony, his colonists, through a really difficult time and was able to defeat British out of the water. He had all sorts of tactics that the British weren't used to. He had these original ideas, and he was able to get control. And at the end of the day, if you have a very powerful leader in place and not the best resources, this shows you that you can still get things done. Those colonists were able to implement those new defense tactics with Washington's help and was very successful in doing so. Alright, let's look at key concept 2. We're going to start to see American political leaders, right? And they're going to create these new ideas. And their ideas are going to form our Constitution and our Declaration of Rights. Now, at this stage, we have a couple different versions floating around, a couple different informal drafts, right? And soon we'll start to see them kind of come together in a little bit and form a real signed document. A lot of them at this time started to share some common ideas. They wanted to protect their individual liberties or their rights, and because of their really poor experience with the British rule, they wanted to get rid of centralized power as much as possible. That's going to lead to these checks and balances that we have today in the government, and less centralized power, and more putting the power into the states and different branches of government, so things are more balanced than how it was over in the British. So we're going to see these new forms of national culture and political institutions that are going to be put into the US. Even though that we start to see still like these differences in perspective of economy or political or social policies, we're going to start to see some of the colonists come together and work together on these documents that will help to better the US as a whole. Even though they're still having some minor disagreements, they're going to start to mesh together and share some of their ideas and even fight it out into the end. Yes, Harris, the Constitution was influenced by Enlightenment ideas. And those ideas are really coming from conflict, right? At the end of the day, they're figuring out person A is saying this, person B is saying this perspective, and they're coming to some compromise that's going to create a fairly neutral Declaration of Independence, Constitution, right? All important documents that are going to help to support the Americans and their citizens in success and being free and having those American ideals that we have today. that's going to set us up for the future and the success of what we see today in how we're free. So now we're going to shift a little bit, and we're going to see Franklin's Albany Plan. This is going to be important. So Franklin's Albany Plan attempted to establish a colonial government. And he wanted three things out of this. He wanted a Grand Council, he wanted a president, and he wanted the council to be able to collect taxes. So this Grand Council was going to oversee matters of defense, expansion, and policy with working with the Native Americans. We're going to see a president that's going to be appointed by the king who would oversee all of this. And this council is going to be authorized to collect taxes for military costs, right? We're going to see that this council, in Franklin's eyes, should be able to collect these taxes from the states, or in this case, we still have the colonies, and the colonies aren't thrilled about that. The colonists are totally going to reject it because they feel like it didn't give them any authority. There was no decentralization of power here, which is the overall goal of the colonists here, because they want to get rid of what they're used to having from the British. They want to get rid of those British rule ideals and replace it with their own more democratic and less central-based government approach. And also, on the flip side of that argument, London argued that it gave the states too much. But if you look at these three things that Franklin's plan was based on, there's not much power going to the state at all. It's more power that's going to this president that's still being appointed by the king. So at the end of the day, there's still a king in place that has the ultimate say. Alright, so we're going to look at key concept 3.3 in period 3 now. So decades after American independence, these interactions between the different groups, so we have the Europeans, we have the Native Americans, we have the Africans. Again, it's going to result in more competition for resources. We're going to see shifts in alliances. We're going to see shifts in cultures and values, and how religion and cultural beliefs and even food is shared and changes amongst these subgroups that are going to exist in the colonies. We're going to have a continued presence of European powers in North America, and that's really going to start to challenge the U.S.'s well-being. And now, more than ever, the U.S. is going to have to find ways to safeguard the borders and maintain a way of trading with the rest of the world that wasn't going to be restricted by the British, so that they could promote their own economic interests. They were tired of being overseen by the British, and they totally felt that it was time to break free and find their own ways to safeguard themselves. Now we're going to start to see all of the taxes that the British are going to impose onto the colonists. The first one we see here is the Sugar Act in 1764. That's going to be an import tax on sugar that the colonists had to pay. A year later, we'll see the Quartering Act, and that's going to require colonists to feed and house British soldiers. And this right here, the Quartering Act, was the turning point in the colonists and truly starting to rebel against the British power. That Quartering Act and having to support these British people got them pissed off. And then you'll see here the Stamp Act was the most hated of them all by the colonists for one reason. The colonists were required to purchase stamps for their bills, for letters, for legal documents, for pamphlets, for newspapers. And they started to cry the infamous phrase of no taxation without representation. At this point, they realized that they were being so heavily taxed by the British and they were being given nothing in return. They didn't feel that the protection from the British was enough at this point. They just thought, hey, we're being taxed in so many ways right now, and we have no say in how our government's run. And that makes them even more angry from what happened in the Quartering Act. That adds on to the tension that we're going to see between the two groups. We also have the townshed or the tea tax. That's going to tax a lot of things, including tea, and then that's going to lead to the Boston Tea Party later. We have the Enlightenment during this time as well. We have people like John Locke and Hobbes that are going to start to influence the way that Americans think. They're going to bring these new ideas into light and discussion amongst the Americans. They're going to start fighting for their rights. They're going to look into democratic ways to start leading their country. They're going to look into the separation of powers that we know is going to be important to them because they want to break free from what they're used to with the British and equality. They want to start treating people the same. Common sense is another important document that was written during this period and during the Enlightenment. It was written by Thomas Paine in 1776, and it argued that the large land that America has should not be controlled by tiny England. He believed that the U.S., or America at the time, the colonies, were so big that it shouldn't be controlled by a tiny country on the other side of the world. And he believed that the colonists really needed to declare their independence and move on. He was totally done and really fed up with how the British were treating these colonists and these settlements over here, and were still so heavily taxing them without any representation, without any say in the way that their government is run. And that's why we're going to start to see this shift. All right. Now we're going to see the Declaration of Independence. We're going to see the Second Continental Congress that's going to come together. We're going to meet in Philly in the summer of 1776 to vote on independence from Britain. And in this case, Thomas Jefferson is going to be appointed here to draft the Declaration of Independence. And he's going to be the main person that's writing this document and starting to form really the first formal collection of ideas that's going to lead to the actual Declaration of Independence. Okay, so he's the main person that's behind the Declaration, and it's important to see that the people at the time believed in him. That's why he was appointed, is that the colonial leaders all kind of settled on his perspectives and his ideas and his contributions to this Enlightenment period. And they thought, why not let him write it? Why not let him be the leader of this? It seems like he has some good ideas that he wants to put into place. He was given a chance here. All right. Now we move into period 4, which is 1800 to 1848. And this picture here, I'm sure many of you have probably seen in your APUSH class as part of an image analysis. We see people expanding westward. We see this angel floating above them. What could that mean? And also, if you look closely, you see a train. Technology and the development of technology during this time was insane. The amount of things that were being produced and the new ways that tasks were going to be done was great. You're going to start to see, as areas industrialize and start to improve and provide more jobs, you're going to see that new technology really start to emerge. So in period 4, we're going to look at how the U.S. government adapted to the changing demographics in the early 19th century. We're going to look at how the market revolution impacted American society, and also how the U.S. participated in foreign affairs. So here's again the timeline for period 4. It starts off with the election of Jefferson, who we knew was given the chance to write the Declaration, was decided to be the point person for that. That's where we start period 4. Then a couple years later, in 1812, we have the War of 1812. And then in 1838, we have the Trail of Tears. And really, the end of period 4 starts to wrap up around when Harrison was elected. Alright, so let's look at our key concept for 4.1. So the U.S. began to develop a sense of modern democracy. It's the first time in our new national culture that we're going to see this modern democracy brought into our society and the way that the Americans were living at the time. So Americans sought to define the nation's democratic ideals and change their society and institutions to match them. So Americans finally agreed upon a set of democratic ideals that they would be able to all use at the same time. They agreed that it was time to come together, it was time to unite, and they did just that. And the transition to this more democratic way of life was going to be achieved by a voting system that was based on property ownership. So we know that the property owners at the time were rich and white men. So even though this wasn't perfect, it's the first way that we're seeing democracy used. Having rich white men isn't the best way as creating like a voting pool, but at this time it was the first real showing of a democratic society. We're also going to see an increase in numbers of Americans that are working outside of the government. We're going to see more industrialization. We're going to see more jobs that are being opened up in factories and more opportunities for these American citizens to start to branch out and to explore new career options. So, as I just said, we're going to see these innovations in technology and agriculture and trade, and it's really going to start to accelerate the economy. And it's going to start to change the identities of the U.S. as well. And what I mean by that is the U.S. is going to be seen a little bit differently now. So we're going to be seen as a really big trading country. A lot of countries are going to be able to view us as someone that's able to both provide a lot of crops and goods, and also as a buyer. Now more than ever, we needed those additional materials to keep going from other countries. So they're going to start trading with us. We're going to see more people that are working with the U.S. in trade. So we're also going to see new transportation systems. That's going to be important to the agriculture and the trade and the trade growth. By this new method of transportation, you can bring goods from point A to point B in the country, which is super important. And now more than ever, you're able to trade those goods in a faster way that's going to allow for more trade. We're also going to see some market revolution, and that's going to have effect on the U.S. society, on the workers' lives, and relations as well, relationships. and how family dynamics are going to start to change. More people are going to start to go to work. More people are going to be out all day working and in these labor fields or trading more, instead of just a couple high up people working in government positions. You're going to have a lot more factory workers. You're going to have a lot more people acting as merchants and trading goods with people as well. And this economic development is going to shape the settlement and trade patterns. So we're going to see that at major seaports, you're going to have more trade going on because it's more accessible for the US as well as other countries to trade. So those trade ports are going to become huge settlements for the US at the time. And that's where those growths of the different regions are going to really be seen, is along those major ports. And then from there, it will branch out even more. So the key concept for 4.3, again, is the US interest in foreign trade is going to go up. We're going to start to see some new foreign policy that's really going to accelerate the trade internationally. It's going to take some public opinion input as well, but primarily we're going to look at the government and their perspective on foreign policy. So this public opinion, if we think about it, is coming from the merchants, right? So the merchants are all for being able to trade with more people, and the government is going to take a little bit more conservative approach. But at the end of the day, we were able to open up more trading opportunities with these new countries than we ever saw before in the history of US. So we're also going to see that the US is going to claim more territory throughout the continent and is really going to push that foreign trade. You're going to see the acquisition of lands in the West is going to start to rise some contest over the extension of slavery into new territories. So that's going to be a point of tension. But overall, the biggest takeaway here is that you have new expanding foreign policy that's going to lead to more foreign trade. All right, so before we move into period 5, we're going to take a quick 3-minute break, and then we will come right back and dive into the couple last periods, and then wrap up from there, provide you with a couple more resources for review. So we'll resume in just about 4 minutes, all right? I'll see you then. All right, we are back with period 5, which is 1844 to 1877. So let's dive right in. So here's period 5's essential questions. So we're going to look at the motives and the consequences of westward expansion and the causes and consequences that were behind the Civil War. And we're going to also look at how the U.S. government reacted to post-Civil War pressures from the Northerners and from the Southerners in the U.S. So here's a timeline just for your reference. We're going to start with the election of Polk, Manifest Destiny, and then the Mexican-American War begins shortly after that. And then we move right into period 5, all right? So period 5 is going to wrap up in about 1877, when the Compromise of 1877 is brought about, and Jim Crow starts. It's also right about 10, 12 years after the Civil War ends, Lincoln is assassinated, and the 13th Amendment is added. So now we have our first key concept for period 5. So the U.S. is now going to be more connected than ever with the world. And there's going to be even more expansion in trade, in international relations, and foreign policy that we're going to see that's going to create those deeper connections with the U.S. There's a lot of economic and security interests that are going on. There's an acquisition of even more territories that's going to lead towards even more westward migration and even overseas initiatives that are going to lead to more growth. The idea is that the U.S. wants to feel secure in its borders, and it wants to have enough land so that it feels powerful enough to be able to keep that land and be able to sustain a country and support their citizens. In the 1840s, 1850s, we're going to see that Americans continue to debate questions about rights and citizenship amongst the other people that are living in the U.S., those various groups of U.S. inhabitants, like the Native Americans. They're going to consider what that's going to look like for them. And some Americans really believe that everyone in the U.S. should have the same rights and same citizenship, and some Americans are going to believe that they're not going to have that at all, and they think that they're not really Americans even though they're here, and that they should be treated poorly. All right, so we're going to see that intensification with the expansion, and we're going to start to see, again, these deepening regional divisions. And we kind of started with this in periods 1 and periods 2, and then we kind of got unified, and now we're starting to divide again. And we're going to see these arguments mainly over slavery. We're also going to see a couple economic issues that are put in there, and for sure political issues that are going to lead us into a civil war. And those ideological and economic differences over slavery is going to produce so many different responses from the Americans in the North and the South as well. And those responses are going to look different. And that's what we know is going to tie us into the Civil War, is these different ideas between the people in the North and the people in the South that's going to create the intense conflict. And debates over slavery came to dominate political discussion in the 1850s, and then that's going to really lead to a bitter election in 1860. All right, so now we have key concept 5.3, and we're going to see that the Union military has a victory over the Confederacy in this really devastating civil war, right? We're going to see many unresolved questions about what the power of the federal government looks like And we still haven't really figured out citizenship right issues either. We're still kind of up in the air about this. Not many people have totally made up their mind about what they're going to do with this. So it's still for sure very uncertain. All right. And we're going to see Reconstruction is going to really start to kick in after the Civil War. It's going to end slavery. It's going to change the relationships between the state and the federal level of government. And that is going to also tie us in to even more debate. We're going to see new debates over what citizenship should look like. And again, this is continued, but it's even more intense now. Even the Civil War is over, people are trying to come together, but when they're coming together, they're butting heads. They're also going to look at what the rights of African Americans should be and what the rights of women should be, along with all of the other minorities that are in the U.S. So now we're going to look at period 6, which is 1865 to 1898. Okay? So here are essential questions for period 6. We're going to look at how industrial capitalism affected U.S. business and politics. We're going to look at the motives and the consequences of 19th century migrations. And we're going to look at the social norms and how the social norms were challenged during the Gilded Age. So here's our timeline for period 6. Starts off with the Compromise of 1877. That's going to end our Reconstruction era. And I'll give you just a second to give this timeline a glance. All right. We also have the second page of our timeline here, and period 6 is going to really end a couple years after the Panic of 1893. We're going to have a couple more important events as well, but that's one of the most well-known as Panic of 1893. And then from there, period 6 will wrap up as well. So let's take a look. So we're going to start to see technological advances finally after the Reconstruction period is over. We're going to see these really large-scale production methods, and we're going to see these new markets that are opening. We're going to see even more capitalism than we've ever seen before. Now, these new systems of production and transportation, even though they allowed, as you can see in this picture, for a lot of good industrial work to happen, a lot of good textile work to happen, it's not going to be that popular amongst farmers. Some farmers are going to be really resistant to these changes and don't really believe in this new technology. It feels like their jobs are going to be taken away, that they're going to be replaced by these machines, that they won't have to work as much. But during this time, that's really not the case. They're still working just as much, but they just have to work a little bit less with this new technology. And even though there was that variety of responses from the farmers, overall, as we've seen, that technology at the end of the day is going to be generally accepted and used. So let's look at key concept 6.2. We're going to start to see a lot of opportunity here, right? We're going to see social and cultural change that was accompanied with the industrialization, and that's going to happen in urban and rural areas of the U.S. It's not just happening in urban areas. And we're going to see a lot of migrants that are starting to move towards the West. And why are they moving towards the West? They're looking for new land, new economic opportunity. And even though they're doing this and they're moving westward and they're trying to find these things, it's going to spark even more competition amongst those people and even going to spark a little bit of some violent conflict mixed in there as well. So here we have key concept 6.3. So we have that the Gilded Age is going to produce some new cultural and intellectual movements. We're going to see some public reform. We're going to see political debates over economic and social policies. And then what that is going to lead us into are these dramatic social changes during the period that are going to start to inspire these political debates about citizenship, corruption, and the relationships that are going to exist between businesses and the government. So we know that these debates, especially about citizenship, have been going on for a long time, and we're going to start to see that those questions start to get resolved just a little bit more. One new thing that we're going to see looked into even more is the relationship between business and government. You're going to start to see more taxes, more enforcement of different policies, and starting to regulate some of these businesses as well, and try to provide a fair experience for more people. Alright, so that wraps up period 6. Period 6 was kind of a quick one. So now we have our last period that we will be reviewing, which is period 7. So period 7 is 1890 to 1945. And as you can see from these pictures, it's going to have to do a lot with employment. So we're going to look at the goals and the achievements of the progressive era. We're going to look at how culture really starts to blow up in U.S. society. And we're also going to look at how global conflict of the early 20th century affects the U.S. Alright, so as always, I have a little timeline here for you. We're going to start with the Spanish-American War in 1898, and we're going to end period 7 with Pearl Harbor in 1941. I'll give you a couple seconds to look this over if you want to take a screenshot of it to say that these are some great events to know. Alright, so let's dive into period 7. So our first key concept here, we have the U.S. that's continuing their transition from a more agricultural economy to something more industrialized, right? We're going to see these large companies emerge that are going to start to build the foundation of large businesses and large amounts of employment and different opportunities that were going on here. In the little cartoon that you see in the bottom right of my screen, this also goes over some of the negatives during the time. You see that there's some class privilege that still exists. There's some monopolies that are happening. You have trust issues and bribery that's going on, right? So in the progression area during this early 20th century time, progressives are starting to respond to the political corruption that's going on around them. They're seeing the economic instability, even though there's new opportunities, it's still not quite stable, and all of the social concerns that are also going to arise. During the 1930s, policymakers responded to the mass unemployment and social issues that were really going on during this time of the Great Depression by turning the U.S. into a limited welfare state. This limited welfare state If you don't have a good understanding of what that means, I strongly encourage that you spend a little bit of time diving into that, because that's going to be important to really understand what the U.S. was looking at during this time. How the leaders were trying to kind of push us forward during this time when things were uncertain and not perfect. All right, period 7. This is our second key concept for period 7. So we have that popular culture is going to grow. It's going to have a great influence in U.S. society. Even though there's some debate going on, the popular culture and some of the basic American values that we know today are really going to start to blow out during this time. We're going to start to see some economic pressures and global events that are going to cause a quick change in the way that things are run. All right, so here is our third key concept for period 7. We have that the participation in a series of global conflicts is going to propel the U.S. into this position of international power. So this is going to reignite some of those debates that we've already been having about the nation's proper role in the world. Because we're looking at the global conflicts, the U.S. is going to try to start to figure out their place. And then in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, acquisitions, we're going to see even more land being acquired by the U.S. in the Western Hemisphere and the Pacific as well. That's going to be accompanied by heightened public debate, again over the role of the U.S. So we're going to see these global conflicts, and then we're going to see these acquisitions of more land in the Western Hemisphere and the Pacific region. That's going to lead to the debate over America's role in the world. So we're also going to see that World War I and its aftermath is going to really start to intensify the debates, okay, and how the U.S. can start to achieve national security, and how the U.S. can start to pursue American interests. So even though those interests were pretty broad and not that greatly drawn out during the time, it's something that the U.S. was really going to start to look into. The U.S. also participated in World War II, and that's really going to transform American society. As the U.S. wins, we're going to have these great allies from the Axis powers, right? And then from there, that's going to transform the U.S. into a global political and military leader and model for what many other countries want to achieve. That's where we're leaving it in period 7, is that the U.S. is gaining a lot of power and respect from other countries around the world. All right, so before you go, I want to talk about a couple more things with you. So, first, in the description below, you are going to see a breakdown of every single period that we went over. It has a summary of each period, and it also has a Quizlet set. In the description, you will also find this PowerPoint that you can review at any time. That's free to use. And then all the way at the bottom, you'll find our website and our Discord as well. And on our Discord, we have a massive AP study guide that you can take advantage of. It has every single AP subject on there that you can review, including U.S. history. So I encourage you to take use of that as well. And the Quizlet sets are available to help as well. Those, again, are in the description, along with the accompanying descriptions of each period. Now, I will stay on for about 10-15 more minutes to answer any questions you have. So feel free to ask them in the chat, and I'll answer them. And if not, I hope that you enjoyed today's live stream. and that you have a great day.